Time now for your business news, and now business editor Devan Murugan is just going to give us more details. Devan, another drop in the unemployment rate in South Africa. How significant this time?
Yeah, good afternoon, Maseko. Always good news when you have a drop in the unemployment rate. But of course, what's important is, does it make a dent to the huge amounts of people out of work? Let's quickly run through the numbers for you. So the unemployment rate for the fourth quarter of last year, that's October and December, the official unemployment rate, 32.7%. What does that mean? It translates into 7.8 million people out of work. But of course, you speak to the unions and any of the poverty activists, they'll tell you the most important one is the expanded definition of unemployment, which includes discouraged workers, people that have stopped looking for work. That's 42.6%, 11.8 million people out of work in that regard. Let's just switch over and give you some context as to what that means. So remember that before COVID-19, if you look at around about October October 2018, well, my apologies for that. Let's just take a look at this quarter before we get on to the next page. So an improvement in the unemployment rate, that was 169,000 jobs that you've seen there created in that quarter. But what I was talking about was really sizing up what this really means in terms of where we were in the fourth quarter of 2018. We are now around about 615,000 jobs, fewer jobs than we had before COVID-19 in 2018, which means that despite the fact that the unemployment rate is improving a tad bit, we still have a whole lot of jobs that are out of the system, more than 500,000. I want to get some context into this now very quickly and bring in Kevin Lings, the chief economist at Stanlib. Kevin, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. So, I mean, it always is good news when you see a dip coming into the unemployment rate. I just pushed up this number. I mean, it's something you spoke about the last time we chatted, that in real terms, we still have more than 500,000 fewer jobs than we had back in 2018. So I suppose that's a significant measure to see where we are now, isn't it?
Devan, that's exactly right. So we haven't recovered fully from COVID, although you would say that we've made progress, right? We've been adding jobs. In the last couple of quarters, we've been able to get the unemployment rate slightly lower. So at least we're moving in the right direction. And added to that, I was worried, Devan, ahead of this number, that because of the increased electricity outages in the fourth quarter, that we would see a worse unemployment rate or some job losses. And that's not happening. So that tells you that the business sector, despite electricity, is proving to be fairly resilient. That doesn't mean they're about to add a hell of a lot more jobs, but they are clearly mindful of the fact that skills are difficult to come by, and that you don't want to simply get rid of employment with this idea that you can add people back at a later time. That's much more challenging. So to me, this employment report was encouraging, but we've still got a lot of work to do to get back to the previous level, and then a lot of work beyond that to really get the unemployment down meaningfully. Most countries want to see their unemployment rate ideally below 10%. So that gives you some context as to how high our unemployment rate is overall.
Yeah. Kevin, you always talk about this figure, which I think is a very important sort of sobering figure to mention when we talk about efforts to remedy our unemployment rate. How much jobs do we have to create just to keep the unemployment rate stable? I mean, I think that's an important figure, isn't it? Because it tells us whether or not overall we're making economic success in that regard.
That's right. So in South Africa, because of the population growth rate, we have to add roughly 600,000 jobs every single year in order to stop the unemployment rate going up. In order to get the unemployment rate to come down meaningfully, we clearly got to add a lot more than that. So the initial, put it this way, first stage is you want to add 600,000 jobs and then see if you can increase it beyond that. If you look at South Africa in recent years, obviously we haven't been able to do that. And so we're sitting with an incredibly high unemployment rate. And it's difficult to see that changing and while we've got the electricity outages. It's very unlikely business will add on an ongoing basis. The critical thing right now is at least business is not continuing to cut jobs, and that's good news.
Kevin, I just want to bring you to a figure behind me here. Youth unemployment between the ages of 15 to 24, right? So we have about 10.2 million people in this bracket. What concerns me is that you have 3.4 million people who are not in education, employment, or training. Now, again, the future of South Africa lies in this bracket. And what it tells me is that the preparedness for this bracket of people, these youngsters, to get absorbed into the economy is somewhat of a worrying scenario. That's a staggering figure. Not in employment, not in education, not in training, 3.5 million people. Have we made any progress to actually try and remedy this?
No, unfortunately, we haven't. If you look at the latest data, there was a further increase in, say, youth unemployment. If you look at the expanded definition of youth unemployment, that sits at 71%. It's very difficult to get your mind around how big that number is. And not long ago, Devan, you were saying with the budget, how many people had left university and immediately were applying for social grants, because even though they've got some sort of training or some sort of education, they're not able to find employment. And that's the crux of our problem. We're not able to get people their first time job. And there are many people who don't have proper education or education that is really suitable for the workplace. And so the environment for those individuals even more challenging.
And just as I let you go, Kevin, sometimes when you look at these figures, it's very difficult to draw the connection and proximity over, for example, what's happening on Transnet with our railway networks, dilapidated, and then the power structure dilapidated. But there's a very strong connection there, isn't it? The more we get companies functioning well and getting their exports out, doing well, the likelihood of people being absorbed into the economy is greater. Same applies, I would imagine, to our electricity crisis. This behind me and what's happening with the structural part of this economy is just integrated very, very closely, isn't it?
Absolutely, they're 100% linked. So you're not able to create jobs in a meaningful way if you've got weak infrastructure and if you're not investing in the country. And if you think South Africa's level of investment during the course of last year was pretty much the lowest ever recorded. That data goes back to 1946. So we're not investing enough to create those job opportunities. We clearly can't rely on government to be the key provider of employment. We can't rely on state-owned enterprises. They're not in a significant financial position to do that. So we really need the private sector to invest, but the private sector obviously needs the critical infrastructure. And so the economy ends up being stuck and we're trapped. And part of being trapped is that our labor market then becomes a bit stagnant.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Well, thanks very much indeed for that insight. Chief Economist at Stanlib, Kevin Lings.